Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. We thought we'd have a episode where we try to predict the future dealings with Trump and the United States. This comes in after the meeting with Zelensky and European leaders and the comments and actions of Trump in the last little while. I'd like to say the comment that triggered me to want to discuss this was Trump saying to Zelensky in an offhanded fashion that you just have to have a war to never have an election. And if we know anything about Trump, he projects and gaslights his intentions through his off the cuff statements. And as a spin doctor, they should realize that to counter Trump, you have to take what he's saying and look for what actions he's going to project in the next while or has projected in the past. So I'd like to start off saying that my take on what's going on with Trump is he plans on having a war so that he never has to hold an election to remove himself from power. And it's well within his capabilities to initiate and cause the war. And you see that right from the use of the claims that he has a war on drugs going on with South and Central America and Canada. This initiates stage one of a well orchestrated plan of a criminal mastermind. And I think in this episode, between Cal and I, we can come up with some conjectures to things to watch for, things that are developing, and some rational thought as to why they are happening. So, Cal, would you like to tell the audience about what's happening in Venezuela?
Well, I find it shocking that a leader of one of the premier industrial countries in the world would put a price on the head of another leader. And to find out that Trump has put a price of $50 million on the president of Venezuela, Maduro, is shocking, in my
He
opinion.
actually, in his first term, he actually put a $15 million price on his head in his first term. But he's increased the stakes significantly.
Corey and I have different opinions on why the U.S. is picking on Venezuela. I'll let you go with yours first, Corey, and then I'll spell mine out.
Well, Venezuela is the world's largest oil producer, world leader. And Trump made deals with the oil industry saying, if you give me $1 billion, I'll make it well worth your while to get elected in the second term. And as you see, most of his policies are orchestrated to enhance and return the money to the oil industry. Now, my take is that he has orchestrated this drug war and claimed the leader of Venezuela is the drug king to initiate a couple of staged effects to utilize for his advancement of his hidden agenda to stay in power in the United States. Chevron, in right recently after Trump took power, thereabouts, was cut back on the ability to deliver oil to the Texas refineries. And Trump was trying to do that to initiate the reason for the drug wars and arrests of citizens in the U.S. arbitrarily arresting, claiming they're immigrants or murderers or whatever the concocted stories are. The use of Venezuela and the oil industry was to build a supply of oil from other countries to ensure that if there was a disruption in the Venezuela oil, which was over 200,000 barrels a day, I believe, or whatever it is, but it dropped by 10% after he did that. Just recently, he reinstated Chevron's ability to operate in Venezuela because the company's owed billions from the government there. And he's accepting the oil back to the Texas refineries to get discounts on the oil and return his favors to the oil companies. And in so doing, he is allowing a second maneuver saying that Canadian oil can be replaced. And he's sending a message to Carney saying, well, we'll just replace your oil if you're going to ship it east-west, and so be it. But what happens is, because we have finite pipeline delivery to other ports or directions, that allows the U.S. oil industry to cut the prices they want to pay for our oil again. And that means Alberta and the West will lose a lot of money off the top. So that is going to affect the revenues to the Alberta government and Saskatchewan government as well, and other oil producing areas of Canada. And that is sort of a retaliatory double-edged sword that Trump has swung. And the underlying motive for this is, of course, like he said to Zelensky, I'll get that right yet, Zelensky, was that he could initiate a war to prevent him from ever having to leave office or holding an election. And to be successful at that, he has to have a war on the American continent. And American continent, I mean Central, South America, or North America. He's already declared war on Canada, but he will not proceed unless that's his last option to declare war on Canada, because it would be not enough to ensure that he keeps in power. But what he can do is he can claim that drugs are coming in from Mexico. He can claim that drugs are coming in from Venezuela. And he's threatened huge sanctions on Mexico and told Mexico to take care of its cartels and stuff, of which there seems to be, the Mexicans are saying that's our sovereignty and we will deal with our own problems as we best see fit. And the U.S. is not going to tell us how to deal with our cartel problem because we're dealing with it as effectively as we can. So that leaves only one place of contention for a war that can escalate to the levels that is needed to ensure Trump does not have an election. And this is going to happen before the midterms because he does not want to lose the Senate for an impeachment hearing. And that means we know the timeline for the escalation of a war. We know that Trump is causing ICE to facilitate and cause havoc all across the U.S., hoping for a false flag event. And that false flag event would be having Venezuelans or somebody could claim as operating as an operative for Venezuela to conduct some false flag event on American soil, like 9/11 or something like that. And that gives him the power to immediately try to launch an invasion into Venezuela. And that brings up the issue of why there's 3 missile launchers been sent to the waters around Venezuela. And that just happened very recently, the last few days. So that's my conjecture, folks, is that this is a staging event for a potential war on American continent to ensure that there is a war going on so that Donald Trump does not have to hold an election for midterm. Now, that is my prediction, and all the ducks seem to be lining up in that direction. Hopefully I'm wrong. So what's your take on that, Cal?
I think the U.S. has been trying to take over the oil in Venezuela for decades. Venezuela has the largest reserves in the world, and at one time was one of the top 10 producers and exporters. The Americans under Trump brought in sanctions. They denied Venezuela access to economic markets, financial markets. Then they froze the assets of the Maduro government. They prohibited U.S. persons from engaging in transactions with the government. They then were working on a global coalition of countries to support the Venezuela people to fight to restore democracy and rebuild the economy. Now, since when has the US fought to restore democracy in reality?
Yeah.
They talk a good story, but the only reason they're interested in Venezuela is because it has oil. Now, recently they took the foot off the brake and put the pedal back to the metal with respect to imports from Venezuela. My take on that is the war in Gaza and the attack on Iran are directly related to this decision. You remember the Houthis in Yemen have been able to disrupt shipping. That has a significant impact on oil shipments to the US.
I agree.
Apparently, closing the strait, which is just 3.2 kilometers wide, would force oil and liquefied natural gas tankers to ship around the tip of Africa, adding 4,300 kilometers to the trip. So an extra 10 days to
Yeah.
get Middle Eastern oil to the US. So
And more
America,
dangerous waters too, where there could be
well, recall,
capsizing.
recall too that the Americans attacked the Houthis, the Saudis attacked the Houthis, the British attacked the Houthis, the Israelis have attacked the Houthis,
They're still
and the
there.
Houthis are the only people in the world that seem to be concerned about assisting the Palestinians in their war, not against Israel, Israel's war against the Palestinians. So that's one issue. The second issue is the Strait of Hormuz, where the Saudi and Middle Eastern oil has to travel past Iran to get out of the Gulf. So that's another choke point. And some people are saying that the war, the 11-day war Israel held against Iran, and again, Israel attacked Iran, the Iranians threatened to mine the straits, which would have
Correct. Yeah.
disrupted the tanker traffic. So when you look at the distance from Venezuela to the refineries in Houston, it's an awful lot shorter than going across the Atlantic or around Africa or even through the Suez Canal, and not nearly as dangerous. So the Americans, again, are eyeing Venezuela as the honeypot. That's where the oil is, and it's ripe for revolution because they've been sanctioning the place now for 2 decades.
Yes.
So
So
I don't think Trump is doing this in order to stage a war to stay elected. I don't think Trump cares about whether or not he holds elections.
oh,
I
I
think
don't know. That's where
I,
we
I know
differ.
that's where we differ. I think
We
Trump is
differ.
doing this because it's in the national interest of the U.S. to get away from Middle Eastern oil if they're going to support the Israelis massacring Palestinians, and they're going to support surprise attacks on Iranians, and they're going to sit in Iraq and occupy the oil fields in Iraq, which is becoming harder and harder. And Syria now has gotten rid of their dictatorship, but the Americans don't like the government that's there either. So I think it's oil, oil, oil.
Well, that we both agree on. It is oil, oil, oil. I think it's going to be a drug war on the soil of U.S., blaming Venezuela for it, and that will launch the invasion force. And because there'll be a false flag operation in the U.S., we will see protracted war and there won't be elections. But that's a side effect of it. But recently, just with I think within the last 3 weeks, Trump traded 252 Venezuelan immigrants, alleged immigrants that they picked up with ICE, for 10 U.S. citizens being held in jails in Venezuela. And that is of interest because one of those U.S. citizens was picked up for a triple murder in Madrid, I believe, Spain, and was in jail in Venezuela. I don't know why in Venezuela, but the exchange happened, and now he's a free man in the United States, and he stabbed 2 women and someone he thought was the lawyer that he thought was having the affair with his wife. And this is a person Trump exchanged for alleged criminals in the U.S. to release on the streets in the U.S. So I find that hypocrisy very dangerous to people in the U.S. I mean, you released a triple murder in the streets of U.S. It's no worse than the 1,500 rioters that, went after police officers and et cetera to overthrow the government. The Proud Boys are revered by a lot of ICE agents. Midas Touch showed one stating that he was happy that the Proud Boys were out on the streets or something like that. I think the false flag operation is going to be related to drugs, and that's going to initiate the strike in Venezuela, and that's why the 3 missile ships were sent down there just recently, and I see the escalation going to start. And it's also going to be a great distraction for Trump with his issues with Putin and Ukraine, where he is obviously withheld weapons to go to Ukraine. Now, what he'll do is he'll say, oh, no, we got a impending battle with Venezuela or a war with Venezuela, because Venezuela just enlisted 4.5 million militia to try to defend against the bounty on the head of their president and the impending warships coming close to their territorial waters. They're preparing for an invasion by the U.S. And that would be a great distraction and good excuse not to deliver weapons to Ukraine that could aid in stopping missile attacks on civilians.
What
So
about
it's a win-win
what
for,
about Epstein? You don't forget that
well,
Epstein's still in the news, right? You need something
yeah,
really,
Epstein,
really big to blow him out.
and that's Venezuela. So
Trying to starve them to fucking death and stopping them from having doctors and medical services. They're just
you
such
can't.
hypocrites, right? It's
I
insane, you know.
know. That's the point that, like we need to know why Rubio is throwing this out timely at this time. And it was going after the doctors because they are major suppliers to Venezuela.
Well, apparently there's 20,000 Cuban doctors working in Venezuela, and of course the doctors
Yeah.
that are there apparently are whining to one of the medical associations, obviously because the Cuban doctors are more or less volunteers. They're working with poor people for free,
Yeah.
whereas that kind of cuts into your income as a local doctor when you're relying on your billings.
Oh, probably. I mean, it's a lot of poverty in Venezuela that shouldn't be, because they do have the potential to be a very powerful industrialized nation. But that's another issue. But that's why Rubio attacked the doctor situation in Cuba and made false flag allegations, and it's gaslighting at its finest. There was some other point you wanted to make on Rubio, wasn't there?
Well, basically, he's behind all this vengeful activity against Cuba, Cuban doctors, people in Cuba, Venezuelans, people in Venezuela, and all under the guise of trying to bring them democracy.
Yeah. So I guess that's an added take. It becomes why all these issues relating to Venezuela and the gaslighting and distraction is obviously for the, like you said, the Epstein files, boils back to that. And I think it's even more, it has to do with retaining of power by Trump. Because if he loses or is impeached, the Epstein files come out in unredacted form. So that's another issue.
Well, according to one article here, the Cuban doctors work in neighborhoods where the Venezuela doctors refuse to go.
Oof. Well, that means high crime areas and high disease areas.
Exactly, poor people.
Poor people, yeah. Well, I don't know. That's food for thought. That's for sure. I think Rubio is playing into this gaslighting and trying to set up and stage for a coup in Venezuela as a distraction to the Epstein files. Time will tell. I see it coming. I hope it doesn't come about and that the people in the U.S. can stop it. But the Senate seems to be complicit with protecting a pedophile case and protecting pedophiles. They ignore laws. They have a felon running their country, and they're trying to use sanction wars around the world to bully people to compliance to, I don't even know what they're trying to achieve. A lot of it's revenge from Trump. Like even the Ukraine situation, we cannot forget that Zelensky would not give false information on Hunter Biden. And as a result, Trump has been making allegations that if I'd have got in, I could have stopped the war, which leads me to believe that Trump had phoned Putin and said, hey, maybe you should invade Ukraine because I'll make sure the Senate doesn't interfere with you. And that could have been the reason for the war, because he keeps stating that he could have stopped it.
Well, if we can go back to a couple of months to early this year, Trump signed an executive order claiming that this one gang was an international gang of drug smugglers operating in the U.S. The question then becomes, who are the customers for these drugs? In other words, they're going after the producers. Why don't they go after the customers? And if they had no customers, they wouldn't have a drug problem. So it's
Wow.
easy to blame the people on the other end of your problem for your problem. But as part of that declaration, they accused Nicolas Maduro of systematically undermining of democratic institutions through the suppression of free and fair elections and illegitimate consolidation of power by the regime. Now, doesn't that sound like what Trump's doing?
Pretty much,
He's
yeah.
yeah. He's systematically undermining the democratic process. They're gerrymandering districts. They're firing people that are in opposition to them. They're placing these clowns in charge of everything.
Well, the
So
U.S. gone to shit in the handbasket. I mean, this is pathetic. But
the
like I
other
said, he projects to others what he's doing or planning to do himself.
okay,
And
let's continue then.
that goes back to the Ukraine
Let me
projection.
continue though. This is a March order from Trump.
Right.
The second issue he says is it an endemic economic mismanagement and public corruption at the expense of the Venezuelan people and their prosperity. Now, if you look at what Trump's done with tariffs, that's an endemic economic mismanagement and the
Oh shit,
public
way
corruption.
over. Yeah.
So he is doing exactly what he was accusing the Venezuelans of doing 3 months ago. Then he says the regime's responsibility for the deepening humanitarian and public health crisis in Venezuela. Well, his regime is responsible for the deepening humanitarian and public health crisis in the U.S. as well as in Gaza. So here's they're so full of bullshit. Like it's unbelievable. And I don't think Trump is looking at this to have a war to stay in power. I think he's looking at this
Oh.
to steal the natural resources.
Well, it's a double win for him. It's a win-win. He gets the ability to stay in power, and he gets to get a lot of oil. I mean, they're the world's largest oil producers. So
No, to produce, reserves, not producer, but
reserves,
to,
yeah. Well, they
yeah,
can't produce them.
in order to preserve those reserves for their plucking, they've implemented 25% tariffs on countries that buy Venezuela oil. Now, the U.S. buys Venezuela oil. Are they going to tax themselves for that?
No.
Of course
That's a
not.
pat in the
Of
back.
course not. Now, they're also accusing the Chinese of rebranding tankers that allegedly come out of Brazil, but they're coming out of Venezuela to circumvent the American sanctions. Brazil apparently doesn't produce the heavy crude that the Chinese and the US need, the type of crude that they get from the oil sands in Alberta. So there's the other issue that you were talking about. And if they want to choke off Alberta, they need to get the oil from somewhere else. And you're suggesting that that tar sands type of oil will come from Venezuela.
Well,
Now,
Mexico and Venezuela heavy oils are very comparable to the tar sands oil. A lot of other heavy oils have high sulfur content, which poses a refining issue, which makes it harder to refine, like the Colombia's has a higher sulfur content, and that's one of the issues with their heavy oil. So it becomes harder to find refineries wanting to deal with that when you can get cheaper to refine oil.
But the point is, the Americans don't want to make friends, they want to install friends. Their idea of diplomacy is a revolution. And a
Right.
revolution by force is the fastest way to do it. They've been trying to undermine Venezuela for decades. It hasn't resulted in any progress. They even had a second president declared. Canada even recognized the second president as the president, the legitimate president of Venezuela. Why are we messing with those types of internal problems? Now, Venezuela brought a lot of problems on itself and got caught with the oil crisis when prices went down. What they were doing is using oil revenue to support public programs to the point where other industries suffered in Venezuela. When the oil went down, the crisis happened.
Yeah.
They call it the Dutch disease. The Dutch disease is, if you recall, Holland used to have a market. The first, I would suggest, the first market in the world in, of all things, tulips. When that crashed, it caused an economic chaos. So it's a problem where money's coming in, the government is taking it to support the poor. And of course, they're not supporting the poor by creating economic opportunities, they're supporting the poor by giving them things in order to stay in power. And then when the money stops, the problems start.
Yeah. I see the Venezuela issue as an extension of the Iraqi war. I mean, they lied to have an invasion in Iraq hoping to get the oil. That didn't pan out too well for the Americans. And this Venezuela is on their continent. It's more accessible. And the only government that could maybe stop the U.S. would be Mexico. And they're not really aligned with Venezuela. So Trump is ensuring that they don't align with them. And I think he wants, with these three destroyers in the waters of Venezuela, he's trying to provoke a situation.
Well, I think the three destroyers in themselves aren't really suitable for an invasion.
No, but I mean, it wouldn't take long to mobilize a large invasion force. I mean, they're all on ready anyway with the situation of their ice and the situation in Europe. Trump wants to remove some of the U.S. troops out of Europe. Where's he going to put them? I see it as a potential idea of Trump's to get access to the oil, and it would definitely be a crisis that would prevent elections in the U.S.
Now, to get to Venezuela, they would have to come in from someplace. And I don't believe the Americans are prepared to do an amphibious landing anywhere in Venezuela.
Oh,
However, I can see them implementing a guerrilla operation out of Colombia. Venezuela shares a rather large border with Colombia, and Colombia has been cooperating with the American military for a long time. And Colombia borders on Panama, and you'll recall what happened to the former president of Panama.
yeah.
The CIA used him forever, and then when they didn't need him anymore, they arrested him, gave him 20 years in jail in the U.S., and then shipped him over to France to spend the rest of his life in a jail in France. Panamanians and the Colombians would surely cooperate with any American,
Well,
invasion of Venezuela.
wasn't there a perceived crisis with China buying up and controlling the Panama Canal, and Trump was going to move his military in and take the ports away?
Which was nonsense.
Well,
And the Chinese are suggesting that in Nicaragua they build another canal to circumvent the Panama Canal. So it who knows what's going on there. But the other thing about Venezuela is the Chinese, obviously the biggest oil importers in the world, and Venezuela was or is a huge exporter of oil to China.
yeah.
So if the Americans put another 25% tariff on the Chinese, you know where that's going to go. Trump's causing the economic damage that he's accusing the Venezuelans of causing. It's It's insane.
But it's going to, like, I can't see Trump not causing an invasion into Venezuela. He wants to overthrow the government, get access to that oil, and get a big pat in the back and try to win a Nobel Peace Prize by getting rid of a regime like that. I see it happening. I don't have a crystal ball to see into the future, but the writing's on the wall that there is a lot of staging for something like this to happen. And where there's smoke, there's fire in my books. So
$50 million is a lot of money, especially in a poor
oh,
country. And to put a price on somebody's head like that, what they're trying to do is put pressure on him to leave, essentially, or else get shot by his own people. It's a cheap way to do it. Just think of how much it would cost to invade Venezuela. It's so much easier to undermine the government, whether legitimate or not, and seek to replace them with people that you can trust, that you can buy.
but
And
it also forces Moderna or whatever his name is to look at some sort of retaliation, which could be used to say, here's a false flag attempt on Trump to cause the war. So it has a double purpose, putting a bounty, and that can initiate a war because you can claim that it's the president retaliated and did some invasion attempt or something in the U.S. as retaliatory measures, and that can cause a false flag. If you didn't put the bounty out, you wouldn't have any reason for actions in the background. So it'd be hard to stage a false flag operation.
I don't think they need a false flag operation.
Yeah.
I think all they need is the allegation that they're providing these gangs to the U.S. But here's
Well,
the thing: with all this activity of ICE and all these other people, at some point Trump has to declare a victory over immigration and gangs. At some, you can't continue the war on people forever without.
and that's my point. The extension of the war of the people is to actually have a invasion of Venezuela, claiming you're going after the kingpin and the drug lord.
Well, just think though, he's taken over the police force in Washington, D.C.
Yeah.
He's moved in the National Guard from several adjacent states, and he's got the Marines on the ground. And you look at that and you go, okay,
Fascist regime.
yeah, if you're, yeah,
Like
yeah, who's the fascist?
yeah,
It,
exactly.
and who's corrupting law and order? And he's doing exactly what he's stating that the Venezuelan president is doing. He's mimicking him. It's
Well,
unbelievable
that's
how.
why I believe he wants a war to ensure his hold on power, and all the people around him are aware they need to hang on power, because in next fall when they have the election, if he loses the Senate, there's impeachment trials and he's gone. And once you're impeached, you can't give pardons or anything else. So he has a real problem on his hand, and the only solution is, like I said, he's either got to declare a war against Canada, which wouldn't result in much for him to claim there's an ongoing war. He could do a war against Mexico, and it would be a ongoing, lasting war, claiming the Latinos in the U.S. are a threat to anything and everything for an election. Or he can do the same with Venezuela, claiming that the Latinos are a threat to any election while he's having the war with Venezuela. And because it's land invasions and toeholds and, like you said, going from Colombia in, it would be a dragged out war long enough for him to seal the total control of the U.S. as a fascist regime. So that's my take on it.
Also today, the Department of Justice in the U.S. has promised to start handing over Epstein files to Congress starting on Friday.
Yeah.
So is it a coincidence?
Redacted.
Is it a coincidence that he puts a bounty on the head of a leader of a country the same day that they start talking about releasing information on Epstein?
And moving three
what's
destroyers.
what's the biggest story? Apparently Trump walked into one of his meetings and said to the group of clowns that I need something big to take over the news from Epstein. Give me something big. So they tried the flight to Alaska. That kind of fizzled. No, and so all that did is bring the rest of the NATO clowns over from Europe to give their lectures to Trump, which
which
isn't going
is
to
a
work.
great tactical move. Had Zelensky gone in alone, it would have been a bullying and shit show.
You forgot he was alone for the first hour or two.
Yeah, but
Yeah,
he
so
knew he
they,
had he knew he had backup, so he wasn't too
yeah,
concerned. Just
yeah. So
appease
he
the
wasn't
goof.
spanked. He
Just
wasn't
just
spanked
just
in public.
yeah, just appease the goof behind closed doors and then get him out on the round table where he was put back into his chair like the big baby he is.
And notice they put the prime minister of Italy beside Trump. You know,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
and she looked fidgety the whole time, like she was going to get
Oh yeah.
sexually assaulted at any time.
Oh yeah. Like you can't trust being a woman in the same room with that pervert. So yeah, I guess that's about my take on it. We put up good arguments for both of us, but I think I'm going to see mine come through that there will be a war, unfortunate as it is, and that's how Trump retains power.
Well, your prediction requires the war before the next election cycle.
Yeah, it's soon. That's scary.
I would bet against that.
Well, I hope you're right and I'm wrong in this case. Viewers, tell us what you think and wait for our next topic. I'm not sure what we're going to discuss next, but we thought this one would be kind of interesting since we could make predictions off of actions that are occurring. Okay, on that note, I'm out of here.
Goodbye.
Take care.
Subscribe to the channel, give us a like, and please share the video. Don't be afraid to share this commercial with your friends too.